Hello and welcome to On Books. This week, I'll be taking you through the book Conscious Capitalism. This is a book by John Mackey, who is the CEO of Whole Foods Market, and Raj Sisodia. Together, they wrote this book in 2013, and since then it has kicked off what is known as the Conscious Capitalist movement. In this episode, I will do a reading from the book with a few highlights. I'll play a clip of John Mackey explaining his take on why he wrote the book, and then I'll have an in-depth conversation with our guest of the show, Corey Blake. Corey Blake is a publisher for Conscious Capitalism Press, among a lot of other things which we'll be going into. He'll take us through some of the upcoming books for Conscious Capitalism Press, explain what conscious capitalism is to him and how he got involved in it, and what the future looks like. So I'm really excited for this episode. I hope you stick around, and let's get right into it. Let's go. Conscious capitalism is a movement based on the belief that business can make a positive impact on the world. The movement has made that its mission because, well, I don't know, it recognizes that most people think businesses kind of suck. Businesses have a really bad rap. I mean, what comes to mind for me, I could just name a few, are Monsanto, let's say, polluting the Housatonic and all the PCB pollution that they've put into the world, as well as Nike's sweatshop labor, Marxism. I mean, capitalism, yeah, it has a pretty bad rap. And maybe rightfully so for some of these, really bad atrocities that have happened over the past few decades. But even in the face of that, John Mackey and Raj Sisodia, they've come together and they've made a counter argument to that to say, you know what, there are really good things that capitalism has done. And if we recognize that, and if we harness certain principles of what they call conscious capitalism, we can use business as a tool to make the world a better place. I'm going to play for you now a clip of John Mackey talking about why he wrote the book.
I really believe there's a better way to do business. And the essence of the book is about how business can be conducted in a more conscious way. And some of the things we discovered, we talk about statistically in the first chapter of the book, is really the amazing things capitalism has done that most people are just not aware of. I mean, consider the fact that business's reputation right now in America has really never been lower. The Gallup poll shows that the reputation of big business has a 19% approval rating. United States. I mean, 81% of Americans do not approve of big business. But in fact, business has been amazing. Capitalism really was invented. We had business for a long time, but capitalism was kind of invented really just a little over 200 years ago.
Conscious capitalism is broken down into 4 principles. These 4 principles, if followed, can make a business good, ethical, and heroic, in the words of John Mackey. So let me explain what those are briefly. The 4 principles of conscious capitalism. The first one is higher purpose. So higher purpose is, I think it's best explained through this analogy of red blood cells. There's this quote, it says, "We need red blood cells to live," right? Our body needs red blood cells to live, the same way that a business needs profits to live. But the purpose of life is no more to make red blood cells, the same way the purpose of business is no more to simply generate profits. So while making money is essential for the vitality and sustainability of a business, it's not only or even the most important reason that a business exists. Conscious businesses focus on their purpose beyond just profit. The second principle is stakeholder orientation. There's a quote here from John Muir. "When you tug at a single thing in nature, you find it attached to the rest of the world." So such is the case with business. When you create something, when you create a business, when you put things out into the world, profit is not the only metric that you should be looking at, but rather it's all of the stakeholders, the employees, the customers, the suppliers, the supply chain that you have, even the earth as a resource. What are you putting in? What are you taking out? Being aware of the entire ecosystem is what stakeholder orientation is about. Number 3 is conscious leadership. This is quite simply focusing on the we rather than just the me. So inspiring and transforming to bring out the best in everyone around you. And so just leadership that thinks basically more holistically. And finally, conscious culture. Conscious culture is just embedding these principles in the fabric of the business so that it's in the purpose, it's in the people, it's in the process, right? It's not just maybe some value sheet that you made up. It's not just corporate social responsibility where you're like doing one thing that might be evil and then kind of having this kind of offset of good to make the business look good, but it's really in the entire process of from the thing you're making to the people you hire, to the principals, to the stuff you're serving at lunch, hopefully food, that you really just kind of have a really overall culture that's conscious and aware of all the processes. Doesn't sound easy, but it sounds important. And I think that's worth taking some time to read this book and to think about. All right, so now I'm going to bring you my conversation with Corey Blake. Corey is the publisher of Conscious Capitalism Press. He's also the founder and CEO of Roundtable Companies. He's a speaker and an artist. He has been featured on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, Forbes, Wired. It goes on and on. In this conversation, Corey and I talk about conscious capitalism. What is it? How did he get involved? And what can we look forward to from Conscious Capitalism Press in the future, as well as his 3 favorite books that he feels are making the world a more aware and conscious place. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Corey Blake. Hey, Corey, welcome to the show. Welcome to On Books. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
What is conscious capitalism? What does it mean to you?
So, Conscious Capitalism was founded by John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, over a decade ago. He has always been a believer that business can be a force for good. And obviously, while there are many founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, business owners who their primary concern is profitability, there's also a group of people who are committed to not only driving revenue, which helps them create impact, but to ensure that while they're doing it, that they're taking good care of the world and of the people who are involved in the business. So our goal as a movement is to elevate humanity through business. So that's really what the movement is. Like I said, it's over a decade old. It's got a lot of CEOs and members. They've got chapters all over the country, but it's still a relatively small percentage when you look at business on the whole. So there's a tremendous amount of work to do to move the needle more so that capitalism is something that is appreciated and not abhorred in the world, if you will, right?
Yeah, totally. John Mackey, just somebody I really look up to. Anybody that listens to the show probably knows I love Whole Foods and just love his story and where he came from. I think really putting his heart and putting this purpose into the business that he's created. And I don't know if everybody sees that, but it was when I read the book. So the movement, I guess, comes from the book that he wrote by the same name, Conscious Capitalism, that really kind of opened my eyes just to how much he cares.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. He's a phenomenal guy. I'm very grateful to him for starting this because it's been a pretty intense part of my own journey. He wrote the original book with Raj Sisodia, who is another phenomenal, amazing human being that I continue to get to spend time with and just feel blessed for that as well. So yeah, they started this movement. And I didn't intersect with it until 2014. That was my introduction to conscious capitalism. Prior to that, I had my head down since 2005, growing my own business. And 2014, one of my clients, half of our business at Roundtable is helping people write the book that they're born to write. And we were working with a client named Jeff Sinelli, who runs and founded Witch out of Dallas, which is sandwich chain, hundreds of locations, and he's a fascinating branding phenom of a guy. He had started Genghis Grill before that, and it's just a miracle unto himself. And he said to me, "Don't ask any questions, just pay your money and go to the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit. You belong there." And he had been teaching me this principle of follow the yellow brick road. Right? When somebody who you respect and who cares about you tells you to do something, try your best to shut up and just do it. And so I was following that principle, paid my money, and showed up. And at the beginning of that experience had, I think, a familiar reaction to many people who are new to a conference, and certainly people who have gone to a National Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit will be able to attest to this. There's this initial feeling of who the hell am I to be in this room with this group of people? And then eventually by the end of that 2.5 days in Austin, I knew exactly why I was there and felt like I was really meant to serve the community, which felt audacious at the time, right? To some degree, a bit of a bold declaration, but I felt like the thing that so many of these people were after, which is more of the consciousness in the equation of conscious capitalism, was a thing that was much more familiar to me. I'm a former theater major. I grew up as a performer, and so I'm much more in touch with my body than I am with my intellect. And this was a group of people who had invested dramatic resources in their intellectual horsepower, as they were driving the companies that they were driving, and so I felt called to be of service, and I'm grateful that. When I told the event producer that I felt that calling, she continued to say yes to me over a period of years and let me do crazy things from the stage and lead the group of leaders into experiential workshops and practicum sessions and conversations and even storytelling hours. And every time I did, I felt more and more steeped into the community and recognize that this is a group of people who have a tremendous amount of wisdom, but it's hard to tap into. Consciousness in business, when we talk about it, it's a very ethereal thing, and I say a lot of folks, most of us think we're on the same page when we're talking about it, but I actually think we have very different understandings of what it is, and we have very different ways that we approach it within our organizations. And so I felt compelled to use our publishing background and storytelling background to help consolidate the wisdom of this community into under a single umbrella.
Okay, amazing. So before we get quite to the publishing, I'm curious to step back and look at even just that conference, because while I've read the book, and I imagine a lot of the people listening right now this may be a totally new concept to them. So what could I expect, or what have you seen at a conscious capitalism retreat or workshop? What kind of conversations are happening during that time?
So the conscious capitalism focuses on 4 pillars for businesses, right? 4 areas of attention. Conscious leadership, what's the way in which we're approaching our own leadership? Conscious culture, what's the way in which we are managing our people and engaged in the conversation of our people's wholeness, right? How are we activating their greatest potential as forces in the world? Higher purpose, what's it all about? Why are we doing it? What's the driving force right behind what we're doing other than profitability and money? And stakeholder orientation, which is one of my favorites. It's traditionally in business it's a win-lose equation, right? Negotiations are win-lose. Contracts are set up for a winner and a loser eventually if there's ever some kind of skirmish. And the stakeholder model or orientation model in conscious capitalism asks the question of how can everyone win in this equation. And John is certainly famous for doing that with Whole Foods, right? Working with small vendors all around the globe to create circumstances where their businesses can grow while they supply products for Whole Foods, as opposed to squeezing them out of existence, which a lot of businesses do to one another.
Oh, I love that. So stakeholders, I'm thinking, and for Whole Foods' case, we're talking the farmers, we're also talking, the suppliers, the customers, the investors, perhaps even, just kind of figuring out a win-win-win situation. Is that more or less how you
Absolutely. Yeah, including the employees, right? But any group of people that has a role to play. When you're talking about a large organization like that, right? Government might also have a role, like FDA, for an example, might be a stakeholder, right? So not every impact to a business can be a stakeholder, because they might not care to be they might not consider themselves that way. They might just want to consider themselves a vendor. But there's an opportunity for conversation and betterment when we approach those relationships that way.
What other companies come to mind, just so I can have an image in my head, outside of Whole Foods, that you would say are consciously capital, or how do you say conscious capitalism companies?
Yeah, well, there are certainly a few big ones that are nationally recognized or internationally recognized. Kip Tindall, who founded the Container Store, has been a part of the movement, to my awareness, from the beginning. So the Container Store is another example, excellent example. And there are a lot of companies that are kind of small to mid-size, for sure, Unilever is known as a relatively conscious company, and which is to some degree even challenging to say because they have so many employees that it's hard for me to wrap my head around consciousness at that scale within an organization. But I've heard Paul Pullman speak, and I've kind of felt his energy personally, and so I think they're certainly at that scale. Pretty close. Costco is an example of a group that really I think works to be conscious. Now you got to understand also conscious that it's not an end state, right? It's a constantly evolving as we are as human beings state. So organizations are constantly developing, and they're both conscious and unconscious simultaneously. I think the difference is a conscious organization is aware and paying attention to and prioritizing where it is attempting to grow in its consciousness and its awareness of its impact in the world.
Got it. So it's a continuum where you're kind of consciously or constantly awakening to being conscious, not necessarily like you achieve consciousness and then go home, day over. It's conscious. It's a flow.
As with any personal development, the more that the more you realize that you know nothing, right? So it is a constant unfolding of opportunity growth.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, that's really inspiring. Yeah, I was wondering to learn a little bit more about the companies that did it, and it made me think: is it like a certification, or is it more of just like a way of being?
Yeah, it's not a certification. Currently, the closest thing probably is B Corp for a certification, and Conscious Capitalism and B Corp are starting to partner more. Originally, John Mackey said that he kind of didn't buy into the B Corp thing, but then last year at the CEO Summit, just this past October, he said that had he become a B Corp, the challenges that he had with VCs who wanted to take over the company before he sold it to Amazon, those challenges would have been very different had he been a B Corp. And so he changed his tune on that in front of the community, which was pretty cool to see. So that conscious capitalism itself, it's a regular conversation around certification, but it is more of, I think, something that brings us together to study, to learn from one another. But it's not a stamp of approval because we don't. In many ways, you could say it's very hard to measure, and yet B Corp has done a great job of figuring out how to do that. So rather than reinvent that wheel, there's more partnership that's happening.
Amazing. So tell me a little bit about Roundtable. Roundtable is a company that you founded, and you're currently the CEO. How did you get started with that, and then how did that lead to working with the conscious capitalist movement?
Sure. So I founded Roundtable in 2005 from a very practical standpoint. I was getting married. I had been a professional actor in Los Angeles. I had some fun out there. I did some cool things. But from a purpose standpoint, the bulk of my revenue that I was generating in my own life was from encouraging kids to drink Mountain Dew and eat McDonald's cheeseburgers. And eventually I had to come to terms with that was not what I intended to use my talent and my gifts for in the world.
Because you were shooting totally.
Yeah.
Because you were shooting commercials, or what does that mean exactly?
Right. I mean, when you're an actor out in Los Angeles, right, there's this natural tendency to take what opportunities you can, and somehow I fell into the commercial world and found some success there as a funny guy in commercials. Did a Superbowl spot for Mountain Dew that was named one of the 50 best Superbowl commercials of all time. So I had some, so like I said, some fun and some success, and certainly earned some money. But ultimately, that was not the creativity that I had gone there seeking. So I was kind of living amidst that confusion of everyone around me is telling me I'm living the dream. The money in the mail is telling me I'm living the dream, but wow, do I feel empty? What do I do with that? And so there was what I call my 2-year temper tantrum, where I really wanted the universe to bend to my will, and that didn't go too well for me. Other than I came out on the other side, and like I said, started this company as a very practical exercise. I had started 2 storytelling companies in LA around film, done some producing and directing, had an amazing time and produced some great stuff while at the same time blew up both of those companies by making some really bad decisions in my love life. Dated people who were associated with the projects, blew all of the trust I had earned with with all of my coworkers and colleagues that I had brought together, and those were painful, painful experiences. I was totally a Hollywood cliche. But as a result of that, 2005 came along. I really wanted to leave the industry because I was getting kind of depressed and finding that I was trying to be the version of me I thought LA wanted me to be, as opposed to who I was. And started this company as just a conduit between writers who wanted to write more and earn a living doing it, and businesses who needed different kinds of writing. So it was a practical venture. I knew how to be that conduit intuitively. So I started the company, and thankfully, because of my LA background, very quickly, within a matter of months, people started approaching me about helping them to write books, particularly around the hero's journey, whether it was their own hero's journey or if they were a coach or consultant, the hero's journey of people that they were leading through transformation. And that changed my trajectory. I became very addicted to that work.
Interesting. Do any examples of leading someone through a hero's journey come to mind? I'd love to hear.
Well, I'll tell you about my first one, which had just such a profound impact on me, and thankfully on a lot of people. I was working off Elance back then, which is one of the premier places to find. It's like an Upwork, places to find talent and partner people with jobs. And I came across a guy. He was a Latino businessman named Robert Renteria, and he kind of shared this story with me about a moment sitting in a bar where some 21-year-old kid sat next to him and saw his fancy car outside and his Rolex that he was wearing, and asked him a little bit about, like, what's the secret. And Robert wrote on a napkin, hard work. And the kid, the way Robert tells the story, he said the kid looked like I'd given him gold, and he said so much, and he ran out of there. And Robert came to me and said, I think I have a story to tell. Now, Robert had been he dropped out of high school. He'd been a drug dealer. He'd nearly been killed in a cocaine deal where he had a gun in his face and a trigger pulled, and it didn't fire, and he jumped out a window. Like, crazy story. But that was his epiphany moment of, I better get out of this lifestyle, or I'm going to go to jail, or I'm going to die. And ends up getting his GED, joining the military, serves honorably for 7 years, finds his way into corporate America, becomes VP of a publicly traded company, and then starts his own business. And we told his story. It's called From the Barrio to the Boardroom. We told that story and we released it, and his local paper in Aurora, Illinois, did a big story on him. And the morning it came out, he gets a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there's a woman on the other end of the line who's crying, and she doesn't speak, like he says, like for 10, 20 seconds. And eventually she just says to him, "Where have you been? Where have you been?" And that was the beginning of this insane journey. We've had over 50,000 kids read the book. It's become taught in school. Like, teachers came to us and said, you've given me a curriculum to have a conversation with these kids that nobody's having. And it got to the point where gangs would give their gang members demerits if they saw them with the book, because kids were leaving gangs and going back to school after they would read it. And I've seen it in person. I've seen Robert speak to an entire auditorium full of kids, and I've seen 400 kids line up for his autograph because it meant that much to them to have a moment with him and get his signature.
Wow.
I mean, how do you not become addicted to that kind of work? So that set me off on the trajectory of helping people to share what I call the book that they were born to write with the world.
Wow. What was the book? Did I miss the title? Did you say it?
It's called From the Barrio to the Boardroom.
Oh, From the Barrio to the Boardroom.
This was the first book that we did, and then teachers came to us and said, look, this is great for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, but you got to start this conversation earlier. And so we created a comic book version of the book called Mi Barrio. And then they came to us again and said, you got to start talking to these kids when they're in kindergarten and first grade, because they're surrounded by gangs and drugs. And so we created this pretty hard-hitting, honest coloring book, right, that's having a version of this conversation with kids. Like, how do you get through the maze, when the maze is full of, gangs and drugs and guns and that kind of stuff. And so we've got 3 books in the series, and it's been amazing to watch the impact.
I can't believe I've never heard of that book before. That sounds amazing. Sounds absolutely amazing.
It is. Thank you. And it's certainly set my course in motion, right? I mean, if I have an addictive personality, and it was something that was really positive for me to become addicted to.
Wow. Yeah, great. I'll put I'll put a link down to this book and all the books that we talked to in the show notes. So if anybody listening wants to follow up after. Really
That's
great.
awesome.
Really
Thank
great.
you.
Great. And we were talking a little bit before the interview about some of the books that you're working on now that you're excited about. Do you wanna tell me a little bit about what's on your mind at the moment for a roundtable?
Yeah, so Conscious Capitalism Press we just announced it in July of 2018 and started accepting applications, and we've got a number of books that we'll be publishing in 2019. And so two of them are particularly on my radar right now because I've been knee deep in working on those. And one is by a gentleman named Safwan Shah, and he founded a company called PayActive. He was at the CEO Summit in October and spoke to us as a community. And his topic is about the relationship of time in the payroll cycle. And he made us aware that many of our employees are suffering because they don't have access to money that they have earned but have not yet been paid. And so in America, there's 90 million people living paycheck to paycheck. And currently, obviously, I mean, state of the world today, we're dealing with a government shutdown. So there's, the topic of not being paid is really in the media right now, particularly when you've done work and you haven't gained access to that. And so because our hourly workers, our what are called lower and medium wage workers, don't have access to money that they've already earned, they turn to payday loans. They get hit with more late fees, and they pay a ridiculous amount of money for the privilege of being on that bracket of really not having the study that came out I think last year, maybe a couple of years ago, that the majority of people in America can't come up with don't have $400 in savings, right?
I know this. I read the Atlantic article about it.
Yeah, so
It's amazing.
so he just woke us up to this reality that in essence we're borrowing money from our employees.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But it was this head slapping moment, and he's created an app that actually is incredibly powerful and gives people access to money that the percentage of the money that they've earned but haven't been paid yet. And it also supports them with financial education for the long run to help them be more financially solvent and to build wealth. I mean, it's absolutely profound. So his book is called It's About Time. And it's a bit of his story and a bit about the history of how the heck we got here, and a real call to action for leaders to create more win-win between the employees who are suffering and the businesses that are suffering, because the loss of productivity due to financial stress is ridiculous. It's like upwards of $300 billion a year. It's just crazy how much time is wasted by people being stressed out about their money. So his is one I'm excited to release. We'll release it. I believe it's coming out in April of 2019. Yeah.
Nice.
And the other one is by Sonny Vanderbeck, who's the head of Satori. Satori is a conscious company that invests in other businesses. I think their portfolio is about $1 billion. So he's got a lot of credibility. Fascinating guy, was a former Army Ranger before he got into business. And his book is about how to consciously sell your business. It's called Selling Without Selling Out. And as Sonny talks about, the most important day of selling your business is the day after the deal goes through, when you have this new sense of identity and new awareness and determination of, like, am I happy or not that this went through, right? Because sometimes people sacrifice a lot. They might stay on with the business and now be working for someone who they don't feel aligned with. They may have sold out their employees in a way that their employees are no longer going to be taken care of. I mean, there's a lot that's precarious. And so his book is about how to engage in that process when you're selling your business so you feel good on that day after the deal goes through.
So it sounds like that book speaks more closely to business owners, CEOs, this kind of management crowd.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, yeah, it's certainly about anyone. It's a great book for anyone who is in that entrepreneurial zone, because these are questions you want to be asking at the start of your business, not just the time that you're selling, but there's so much prep work, that goes into how you're going to exit your business. So anyone who's in that leadership realm or who's looking to be, it's a great book for.
Yeah, I love that. It would, I mean, as a business owner myself and thinking about all the stakeholders in a consciously a consciously capitalist way. Yeah, that really sounds like that does kind of drive towards one of those pillars of just being aware of the stakeholders, because it's probably, there's so much temptation to feel, well, I'd say pressure. I've been there in the past, to just feel that pressure from the people who have invested, financially in your company, and to try to balance that with all the other people. I have not sold a company, so I don't particularly know, but I could definitely see why the world would need a book like this, of just figuring that out and talking about that situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it like a parent, you've raised this as your child, and there comes a point where you're selling it. It's a very odd thing. Someone's going to give you a big check, and then you're not going to be in control of your baby anymore. Right?
Yeah.
You're sending it out into the world in a way where it actually isn't necessarily going to be looking to you for advice either. Like, it's a pretty permanent separation in many cases, right? So how are you doing that with as much care and attention as it deserves?
Yeah. How do you think about books that Roundtable is going to work on in collaboration with Conscious Capitalism? Do they come to you with the ideas? Is there an opportunity for writers to pitch you? Is there a certain theme that you're looking for next? Is it, I'm just kind of curious where your head's at.
Well, something that actually Sonny Vanderbeck, the author of Selling Without Selling Out, taught me was about lines of development, which is some terminology I hadn't heard before, right? So you can have people within the conscious capitalism movement who are highly developed in their conscious communication, but not necessarily highly developed in their conscious finance department, for example. So you got people who might be super conscious who still invest a bulk of their own personal assets in companies that are not conscious, right? In companies that are hurting the climate, for example, but generate a good return. So there are these different lines of development. What I'm discovering is there are a rather infinite number of them. I just got awakened 2 years ago to one that was another head slapper for me, in the same way that Safwan's was about the timing of payroll. And that was, what does conscious law look like? Like, law is very adversarial in nature. It's intended to be, for the most part. It's fighting over money when things go badly, which no one predicts that they will, right, or hopes that they will. And this idea of conscious law is actually around how do we start relationships with the intention of preserving the relationship if things change, if we find out we're no longer aligned. How do we do it in a way where we don't want to destroy one another and create a winner and a loser, but simply move on, which actually we'll speak to that in one of the books that I sent you about that are my all-time favorites in nonfiction. Right? So these are tough topics, and unless you've spent your life, right, as an attorney helping people fight over money, which Glenn Meyer did, who was the one who introduced me to conscious law, he had that awakening one day of like, is this what I want the rest of my life to be, helping people fight over money? And eventually determined he didn't. He wanted people to actually be fighting for the relationship to exist beyond the boundaries of an agreement. It's such a, to me, it was a profound awareness of, holy smokes, we claim to be conscious, and yet none of our agreements are positioned to actually support the success of our relationships right outside the boundaries of a project that we're working on. So there are so many lines around that. What is it to consciously market your company? Sonny Vanderbeck addressing it. What is it consciously to sell your company? Safwan, what's the conscious relationship between how you pay your employees? Each of these is a deep, profound study. And so we're looking for people who are passionate about whichever line of development they've spent probably the bulk of their career exploring.
That is so, I have a hard time even thinking about conscious law just because of, I think you defined it pretty well right there. And I hadn't even considered that. To me, coming to conscious capitalism, I grew up, I would say, quite, I don't know, I had some like residual teenage angst, and I think kind of took that to like my 20s, where I was, I think I was very, read People's History of the United States, very like from that mindset that business is bad. And I think it took me a few years after college to seeing really examples of businesses that were doing good in the world, whether it was Whole Foods, Patagonia, hearing these stories of these founders that business, there could be an intention to purpose. and that capitalism really has contributed so much that, instead of working against it, working with it. And so that really inspires me and gets me really excited. And I love that you threw law into there, because that to me goes, I feel like I go back to that old way of thinking, like, no, law is us versus them. How do you make law win-win? So I love the question. Like, my mind is blown.
That's awesome. I think lawyers who step into the conscious capitalism community worry that people will hate them. And some people look at them and go, what are you doing here? For sure. Like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you find out that they're asking the same questions, right, as anyone who's within this movement of, how do I use my gifts in service to the world as opposed to be destructive.
Whew. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Right.
Very cool. Very cool. Cool. Well, yeah, let's finish off talking about a few of your favorite nonfiction books. I'd asked you before this for some of them, and you had a very clear 3 books that you were like, these are them. So I, of course, respect that, because you've clearly thought a lot about this. So tell me about what are 3 of your favorite nonfiction books? Why should I read them? What are they? Sell me on them.
Sure. So the first one is a book called Giftology, and it's written by a gentleman named John Ruhlin. I'm a member of the Young Entrepreneur Council, and he is also, and I ran across his book, and in addition to the book, John gave me the experience of the power of giftology. When he found out that I had reached out, he sent me so John used to be, just for context, John used to be the top selling salesperson for Cutco knives. And they have like 1 million salespeople, not even joking. And he was the #1 guy. So he understands the power of giving. And it's because what he learned is he wasn't giving away, he wasn't selling knives. He was selling gifts, right? And so rather than try to sell one person a set of knives, John discovered the value of going to a business and helping them recognize the impact they can have when they send a set of knives to someone without their logo on it, right? Not having anything to do with them, being a pure gift. So what I got in the mail is this beautiful set of Cutco knives with my name on them and my company logo on them. And they're great knives, great to use in the kitchen. I love cooking, right? And every time I would pull them out, like, I'm thinking of John, right? And I'm talking, and I can't help but share the story with dozens of people about how beautiful they are, how impactful it was. And it changed our entire understanding of gift giving. Mostly in corporate America, when we give gifts, they have our own company logo on them, right? That's just what we've been taught, that you got to promote yourself even when you're giving a gift. And his book is about the spirit of giving a true gift, which is all about the recipient and not about the giver, and understanding the role that karma plays when we approach things that way. So his book was a huge eye-opener for me, really fun, and it's well written. It's a lot of story-based. It took me a couple hours to get through, and I felt like completely changed my understanding around gift giving. So that was a wonderful one that I highly recommend. And he's just a stellar human being as well.
Let me just pause there.
Yeah, please.
So is the point of the book, or one of the arguments he's making, is that his company flourished because of gift giving? And if so, like, is it a business book, or is it more about, does he like take it there and bring it to his personal life, or is it more of just a business book? Or
well, it's a good question. He's so it's kind of both. Like, right, the impact on him personally, because he's living his purpose, is, I think, immense. He's one of those people that goes, it doesn't feel like a day of work in his life, kind of a guy. He truly enjoys spreading the message of giving. But yes, it is a book that highlights the impact that we can have on people when we give a great gift. That is all about them. When we research and study and make a determination and take a risk in giving, but it not being about us, when we truly do that, all kinds of opportunities can become available that weren't available before. He tells a great story, just to give a quick example. Yeah. He tells a great story of a guy that he wanted to to get to know better, and found out that this guy shops at Brooks Brothers, and then the only one thing other than having a meeting with John, the one other thing that he had planned to do when he had been coming to town was to shop at a Brooks Brothers, and that like 2 hours he had free between meeting John and whatever he was traveling to that place for. Well, it turns out he calls John, his flight is delayed, he won't be able to meet John. So John goes to his hotel and talks the hotel manager into helping him set up a Brooks Brothers in the guy's hotel room. Goes and buys, I think he bought $8,000 worth of clothes from Brooks Brothers, set it up in the guy's hotel room with a note that essentially said, keep what you like and leave the rest. It's a pleasure to do this for you. And John he's not in his room, like the guy goes up to his room and finds that he's got a clothing store. He wasn't going to have time to go shopping at Brooks Brothers because of his flight being delayed. Like it was such a thoughtful, amazing, ridiculous, as I speak it out loud, white privilege gift.
That did occur to me, but yeah.
It is. It certainly is at that level. But I mean, it was such an amazing experience. They got into a relationship. They've done a tremendous amount of business together. And it was a huge, I think, directional change for John's own business, which is a gift-giving business.
Wow. All right. Gift giving. Yeah. So giftology. That sounds great. I mean, having spent a little time at Burning Man too, and that, I'm sure you've heard stories, but yeah. It opens your mind to what's possible in the world, I would say. So yeah.
Yes. The power of receiving something that is purely for you and not for the giver is unusual in this world.
Without the pressure of, or the expectation of reciprocation, to have to reciprocate. Yeah. Beautiful.
Totally.
Okay, cool. And then what else you got? That's number one.
So the second one on my list is a book called Becoming a Great Leader. Of my three, this is the only one that I worked on, and this is by a gentleman named Gustavo Rubin. Very sadly, he passed away a number of years ago, but I got to work on this with him years ago, and it was one of the, I think, most profound books on identity shift amongst leaders for me, and that's my own language and my own experience of the book. But one of the things that he taught me through the book is about the power of first impressions and how strongly they are with us. And the way that he talks about it in the book is that it's our catalog of people is like a file cabinet with note cards that we keep in our brain. And only when there is really intense cognitive dissonance between what my card says and the way someone shows up in the world, that's the only time I'll pull that card out and revise it, right? So I can have an old impression of somebody that's never really been challenged, and so I still see them as that thing they might have been 10 years ago. I don't see who they are today. I experience them based on what I wrote on that card. And it's the power of a new impression is ultimately what he was getting at, and how important it is that we help people to revise those mental note cards that they keep on us so that they are up to date with who we are in the world today, particularly when we're trying to have impact in the world, right? We change frequently. And if we don't give people an opportunity to see that new behavior and experience that new behavior in a profound way, they don't become advocates in our journey, right? And they might even become resistance in our journey. So his book is just a stunning, deep psychological look into leadership and the ways in which we can see each other differently, and ways we can be more powerful in our decision making about how we help ourselves as leaders.
That's beautiful. I mean, what I'm taking from that is, it sounds like there's definitely something about leadership there, but also, I mean, whenever I go home to my hometown where I went to high school, I haven't been back, I go every so often since 15 years ago when I left, but I'm still that person the day I left, sometimes it's hard because you go through all these life experiences, and then, that's the first feeling I get from that is, everybody, I guess everybody's kind of working on their own journey, and a lot of growth is happening, but we don't always see it in each other. I love that. That's really well put. Yeah.
It's powerful for employees too. Like, for example, like if you're trying to if you want to be up for a promotion, right? But the person who would promote you sees you as this previous version of yourself, right? That does,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Suddenly that can create those kinds of challenges. So it's not just for leaders. I think it's for anyone who's in that identity shift work within life that
Really nice.
we're all in, relatively regularly.
Really nice concept. Cool. And let's do one more. You said you had a third one too. What's your third
Yeah,
book?
so this is by Henry Cloud. It's a book called Necessary Endings, and this book I found to be profound because as human beings we're not taught a lot about closure, right, in our schooling, and so maybe you can relate to this, right? Sometimes when relationships are coming to their conclusion, we don't, in my own life, I'll say I haven't always known how to navigate that. And oftentimes what happens is I'll actually throw a grenade on the relationship because anger is easier to manage than grief,
Whoa.
right? And so necessary endings is really bringing awareness of how in nature, right, all seasons come to an end, right? And we are very much modeled after that, and that there are seasons of our life that have necessary endings, and we can pay attention to them, and we can be aware of them, and we can approach them in ways that are more spiritually and emotionally fulfilling, as opposed to fighting those endings and creating challenge within our lives, toxicity within our lives, right? So just that whole awareness around endings was a big opening for me. It was something I had never paid attention to before, and I found it to be relatively profound.
Wow. Yeah, it's not something we really teach people how to cope, how to really work through.
No,
Yeah.
not even close.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Actually, I've never heard of that. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard of that concept. I mean, it sounds it sounds like a cool niche of life that's very very valuable to think about. Wow, these are great books. Cool. I love it. Thanks for sharing these. I feel like
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I feel like I got a good it was a good sizzler that you gave too. I feel like you got me excited. I'm like, all right, cool.
That's awesome.
I know what I'm doing next month. I gotta get these orders out from Amazon. Great.
Oh, I love it.
Corey, yeah, this has been great. Well, thanks so much for coming on Books. Do you have somewhere that people listening right now, if they want to learn more about you, about Roundtable, where could they go to learn more about your books, all this?
Sure. They can certainly go to roundtablecompanies.com. They'll also find a link on that homepage to the Conscious Capitalism Press if they're interested in checking that out. And we do have a gift for folks. I'm big. I do a lot of speaking around this and workshop leading around how to help people find what is it that they stand for, that they're really meant to devote their life to. That's tough for a lot of us, and yet it is something that I've discovered is rather easily evident. And so I've put together a short program as a gift for people that they can find at roundtablecompanies.com/purpose. It's a little experiential work that they can do without realizing where I'm leading them until they get there, which is fun for me.
All right. I hope you enjoyed another episode of On Books. If you did in fact enjoy it, you might want to go to iTunes or Spotify where you can subscribe for future and past episodes, all for free, obviously. If you want to do me a big favor, you can leave a 5-star review of the show. Do it on your iPhone or on iTunes, whatever it is. Tell a friend, tweet it out. It really helps build up the audience of the show. So I really would appreciate that. And you can @reply me in that to let me know. It's @onbooksshow. That's on Twitter or whatever, Facebook, all that stuff. So just let me know. I'd really appreciate it. That helps. There are past episodes. A few of my favorites are the Sapiens episode, Mating in Captivity, Letters to a Young Poet, How Buildings Learn. There's so many good episodes that I think they're good, that you can check out. They're on there. They're free. Check them out. Tell me, what did you learn? What books do you want me to look at in the future? All of that. I would be super excited to hear more. You can see all of the show notes and transcripts and all that stuff at the website on-books.com, or you can also email me, chris@on-books.com. This episode is brought to you by 1 Month, where I teach Learn to Code in 30 days, learn Python, HTML, JavaScript, programming for non-programmers, and a bunch of other skills, coding skills for beginners. That's at 1month.com. Thanks again for listening. The show is always so fun to do. I love talking about books. I love hanging out with you guys. I love the emails I get. Thank you. And enjoy the next episode of On Books. Talk to you soon. Bye.